on today. And would you please stand and join us in repeating the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll begin first with a Safety First minute, and Sheldon Shaw, our safety manager, will give that minute for us.
Good morning. Appreciate the opportunity. Again, I'm Sheldon Shaw, I'm a safety manager here at UTA, and the safety message is our safety poster for the month of February. It is to turn your cruise control off and make sure that you're in control of your vehicle. That's important for this time of year because of snow and black ice and rain are all reasons we should be slowing down and not accelerating. And that's what happens if your vehicle loses traction and you're in cruise control. It's much more likely to go out of control. And even a better solution would be to take transit. It's much, much safer than driving your car. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Sheldon. We have before us, as a board, we wanted to periodically recognize employees who have certainly gone beyond the call of duty and have contributed to our community. And we have a special recognition today of UTA operator Shelley Monson. And we'd ask Eddie Cummins if he would give us some background to that, and then we have a recognition we'd like to present.
Awesome. I'd like to thank the Board of Trustees for allowing a moment to recognize the heroic efforts of Shelley Monson. Shelley is a Mount Ogden Business Unit operator and has been driving the express route from Ogden to Salt Lake City for the past 2.5 years. 2 weeks ago today, at just about this time, Shelley dropped off her bus in Salt Lake City and was returning to Ogden in a UTA vehicle. As she was approaching Kaysville, something caught Shelley's attention. Up ahead, where I-15 crosses over 200 North, she saw a young woman walking on the overpass. As she passed her, the young woman began to climb the cement barrier that separates I-15 from the drop. Shelley's intuition told her something was seriously wrong. Shelley was in the left lane, but safely changed lanes as quick as possible to get to the shoulder of the road. She threw the car into park and ran as fast as she could to the overpass. By this point, the young woman was straddling the railing and appeared ready to leap off the bridge into oncoming traffic. Shelley reached the young woman just in time. She wrapped her arms around the girl and pulled her back over the railing to safety. Shelley then held a very emotional 15-year-old teenager in her arms, hugging her and talking to her until the police arrived. After meeting with a counselor to process what had just happened, Shelley Monson returned to work. All in a day's work? Not hardly. We don't think so, and we know that you, the Board of Trustees, know a hero when you see one. Now we'd like the rest of the community to meet this hero and recognize her for going above and beyond the call of duty, instinctively taking action to save a life. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Shelley Monson, a UTA employee who epitomizes the care and concern UTA has for everyone in our community. Shelley?
Please, if you'd like to say something, we'd welcome that.
It's just, it's pretty emotional still, but I wouldn't change it. You know, every day it takes a simple act of just paying attention. And as an operator, we pay attention to a lot. We see a lot of things out there. I just hope that other people will look at it and see that it takes one scan of your eyes to see something out of the ordinary. And we're all focused a little more on tunnel vision and, you know, where we got to get instead of what's around us. And for me, saving a life is something I never thought I'd do at that depth of a scenario. But I'm proud of the quick thinking and that nobody got mad because I got lanes. Because that wasn't pretty safe. But it was safe because there was no cars going. So I don't know. But thank you for having me.
Well, please, if you come around, we'd like to present you with an acknowledgement. Eddie, would you join us as well? Our thanks to everybody who's involved, and also a reminder to our youth to download the UT Tips app, and it's a great resource for those moments when you're needing some extra help. So thank you, Shelley. Our next item up is our public comment period. And Bob, do we have any?
I don't have any public comments, so I suspect there are many who want to thank Shelley if they could.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Good acknowledgement. I'll entertain a motion for the approval of our minutes from February the 6th. I have a motion by Kent, seconded by Beth. Any other discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. We'll next go to our agency report with Steve Meyer. Steve, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Chair. A couple of things to report to you today. A recent Transportation Cooperative Research Program study, this is a national study done by a portion of the National Academy of Sciences, looked at commuter rail operations across the country with the lens of how different commuter rail operations self-perform their services or contract out their services, and whether those services, how cost-effective those were. And UTA was shown to be very cost-effective. We had some of the lowest operating costs among our peer agencies, operating costs per passenger trip, per passenger car revenue mile, and the second lowest operating cost per passenger mile. I think it demonstrates the value of the decisions that were made by those in the past about how we would operate and maintain our system, and the good work that our current staff is doing to keep those operations going. Also, it's some recognition we received in the past couple weeks from the Government Finance Officers Association to Bob Biles and his financial team with a Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for our 2017 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. This is an organization that evaluates these CAFRs to make sure they're in compliance with these industry standards, and our group over the years has performed very well. So thanks to Bob and his team for that. And that concludes my report.
Well, I know that, first of all, Bob, nobody thanks the finance and accounting guys, and unless they're desperate, and so thank you. That's and
we're not desperate.
And we're not desperate, and it's a good acknowledgement of your staff and the fine work that you do. And Eddie, do you want to talk a little about this acknowledgement on our commuter rail system?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to just turn that over to Bruce and let him provide some additional details.
That'd be great.
Thank you. We are extremely proud of the FrontRunner system and the recognition that it has received in the industry and throughout the nation. When FrontRunner started, there are many in the industry that said we could not do what we had planned to do by operating it ourselves and training and hiring our own employees to do the work. And since we began operations and have shown that it is a viable, and not only a viable, but literally we are the lowest cost per mile in North America in terms of providing commuter rail service. And so we've had many other agencies come to talk to us and look at our system. And as some of those agencies, since our startup, have started up, others have started following our approach and our model, seeing that it's viable, it's cost effective, and productive. And that's probably what I'm most happy to see in that report. Is, you know, Utah is a less dense area than just about. There are a few other commuter rails that are in lower populated areas, but when you're putting us up against the big players, our effectiveness in passenger cost per mile is pretty incredible that we're able to be that effective in our service. So we're very pleased about that.
First of all, Bruce, congratulations. Is there, I mean, obviously our sort of maintenance and preventative maintenance is ongoing. Do we run any risks that somebody would suggest that we're delaying that and that somehow sort of kicks that can down the road? Or do you feel like we are where we need to be in the system for the type of vehicles we have?
So when the system was designed, I think that the vision of those that put together the plan was incredible. The challenge that we are facing today is that things have changed. We now have federal regulations that have required us to slow our trains down to increase some of the safety features. Because of that, it is a much bigger challenge for us to sustain the reliability and the quality of the system that we've experienced in the first 10 years of operation. And so as we're implementing those portions of positive train control on our system, we have been challenged. And so we are at the point, based on those federal changes in regulation and the success of the system, our ridership is impressive. Our peak trains are full. We are carrying close to 20,000 people a day on a regular month-to-month basis. And we're at the point where we need to both replace some of the vehicles or refurbish them to keep them in a good state of repair. And we need to focus on expanding the service and shoring up the system so that we can maintain the level of reliability that our customers expect. As we've been implementing PTC and have had some reliability challenges, our customers have stuck with us. And they've not only stuck with us, but we've continued to grow significantly in our ridership. And what that is a testament to the effectiveness and the need for a strong choice in people's commute. And so commuter rail is an essential part of the long-term viability of the Wasatch Front. And so it has come to the point where we now need to invest in shoring up so that our service doesn't degrade, and expanding so that we can meet the demand that is continuing to rise.
Yeah. Kent, you or Beth, I mean, I know, Kent, you brought this to our attention. And
yes, I was really pleased when I visited the Warm Springs facility last week and saw some of these numbers. I don't know if you've got those numbers with you, but what numbers the cost per rider was, we were just less than $9, and the top people were at $25, as I remember.
Yeah, so our cost per mile is about $8.50. I believe $8.37. I don't have the numbers right in front of me. But the next lowest is above $11, and the average is above $16. And there are many systems that are, of course, much higher than that.
Somebody's spelling you out.
Excellent. It's good to have a good help here. So, so yes, the 837 is correct as our operating cost per passenger car revenue mile. The study broke it down in several different ways, and one of the specific ways was it grouped together like agencies based on level of service. Our level of service, this is based on 2016 National Transit Database data that every agency is required to send into the federal government. And so for the group of peer agencies, the actual average is above $20. It's $20.22. So we are, well under half the cost per mile of our peers. When you look at the cost per passenger mile, which is not just the efficiency but the effectiveness of the service, ours was 36 cents per passenger mile compared to an average of 53 cents per passenger mile for our peer group. So yeah, as you mentioned and recognized, it's impressive that it is that effective.
Well, thank you both, and it's great news, and it's a good challenge as we go forward, looking for some good viable solutions and probably interim steps. It's always hard to rip everything out and start from scratch, and so I think as and I know that we have our report on Front Runner coming in the near future, and as we look at phasing solutions to meet some of those demands that you talked about, that'll be an important conversation to have, both internally and certainly externally with our stakeholders and the legislature. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here today. Our next item up is item 8, which is a resolution in regards to authorizing an execution of an interlocal agreement, multi-jurisdictional mutual aid agreement with the sheriff and other police services. Chief Ross, how are you?
This one is so simple, there's not even a slide.
We're going to make you turn your mic on, because otherwise the folks to my right will chew me out. There you go.
So simple, there's not even a slide for this. This is essentially what we do every day. I think you all understand the mutual agreement. Just a couple highlights of this. The most recent one where this came into play was the Cottonwood Mall incident. Prior to that was the very unfortunate incident at the University of Utah. So we get called, we call them. There's no physical note associated to this whatsoever. It's just what we do every day.
Some mutual aid agreements aren't uncommon. I remember from my city council days,
Correct.
And I think Beth would remember, Bountiful had similar kinds. Have we never had one before, or?
So there was one many, many years ago. The last one we were involved with, if my memory serves me correctly, it was just before I came here, was dated in 2015.
Okay.
So this is just an update as departments have moved away from unified, creating their own departments and such. And now that we have a constant presence in Davis and Weber, we'll be joining theirs, and also in Utah County. So you'll probably see a couple more over the next year.
Okay, great. Any questions on this particular item?
Just a quick question. How long do these agreements typically go?
Amazingly enough, this one's dated through 2068. Yeah,
Wow.
I'm pretty sure we won't be reappointed that often.
I don't think you will be up here again for that.
Yeah, an arbitrary date. I'm sure we'll see many changes as we add cities. Riverton is getting ready to bring on their department. I think they're in this one already, but as things change in municipal applications of police services, we could see some minor adjustments. But
I remember it's not uncommon to have 50-year agreements if they're sort of common sense and we don't have to deal with them for a couple decades or a few years.
That is true, but thank you.
You bet.
Well,
any questions other than?
I think no other. I see no other questions. I'll entertain a motion on this resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we authorize the execution of this interlocal agreement, the multi-jurisdictional mutual aid agreement for sheriff and police services, R2019-02-01.
Second?
Have a motion and a second. We'll roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'd just like to particularly thank our legal department for their work on this, trying to get all these city attorneys together to hash this out. Took some work, so thank you.
Yeah, that is no small task.
Yes.
So thank you, Lisa. We'll go to any pre-procurement items. Steve, do you have some items?
Thank you, Chair. We have 2 items today to share with you. The first is a request for proposal that will be going out for development of the 39th South Meadowbrook Station. You may remember that we currently have the Columbus Foundation with the opportunity site there at 39th South. This would develop the remaining 4.57 acres of property on that site. So we'll be going out and doing a request for proposals, and as there's no cost to this as yet, we will be getting this RFP, and it works through the process of getting a developer on board, having them develop a proposal for that site, and our due diligence requirements during that process.
Steve, question on that. It doesn't, I mean, that's already a designated TOD site, correct? Because
that's correct. We have legislation currently authorizes us to do 8 sites, and this is one of the 5 we currently have in process.
So this is more like an additional phase of that prior approved site, then.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. The second one is we'll be going out for a contract or a procurement for corporate sponsorship and naming. Some of the discussion we've had with the legislature last year with SB 136 and just general discussions about UTA operations, and that is there potential for greater revenue looking at corporate sponsorship and naming? You've seen with say Sandy City with their convention center, they've sold the naming rights to that. Other properties, public properties, have done the same thing, and private as well. The Vivint Arena downtown are examples. So there are firms that go out and help us that would evaluate the potential for our facilities. You could look at our stations, our actual lines, the naming rights to that. So they'll look for those revenue generating opportunities and the value of those assets, and then we would bring that back to the board to make a decision whether to move forward and pursue any of those opportunities that would look viable.
I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that Sandy convention facility is owned by Salt Lake County, so.
I didn't want to say anything, but yeah.
But,
yeah, glad to give you that opportunity to plug your former employer.
Yeah. and I did that agreement, so there we go. But it's so this consultant would just help guide us through and size up whatever opportunities might exist for us, correct?
Yeah. Yes, this would be the first portion of this would be the study portion, and then we would have the option to engage this firm or terminate that contract and go back out for another entity to actually work towards contracting any of this that looked viable.
Okay. Any questions? Beth, you have one?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Steve, I just had a couple questions. Like, what's a rough timeline for the Meadowbrook station and then the corporate sponsorship. Is that in the close time frame, or is that a little further out?
The overall contract term would be 5 years, but I'm thinking I'm not seeing any information there. I don't know if Nicole's with us or someone who could answer that. I would think within the first year we could get the evaluation done.
That's on the Meadowbrook station?
No,
I think on the naming
corporate
rights.
sponsors.
The naming rights.
Yeah.
Nicole is here, by the way.
Steve, I'm here. So we anticipate Trustee Holbrook doing the evaluation immediately after the RFP and then coming back and looking at that and saying, okay, now what do we want to do with the purchasing? So what, as Steve said, that should be in the next 6 months. We should be able to get that done. And part of the evaluation is looking at that timeline and their qualifications of how fast they could get our assets done. There is one piece of us helping them do that. So I think we've already started getting that kind of inventory done. So I think 6 months is well within a time frame that we could start the process. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions on re-procurement?
And just to let you know, on the 39th South,
Yeah.
it'd be a couple of months before you'd see a selected vendor in front of you.
Okay. Great. Thanks for that report. Then, any other on pre-procurement, Steve, or is that it?
That's all for this meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll next go into section 10 of our agenda, which is our discussion items. And I know Matt is called up to the Hill. Michelle, do you want to give us an update, or do you want to tell us that we know everything?
And we'll get what we ask.
And we get what we ask, yeah. Maybe you can just give us an update on some of the things we're tracking.
First of all,
Yeah, there you go.
First of all, I will tell you that you do know everything. That's what you just tell everyone that's the boss. Right? There's 29 days left of the legislative session, and now that we've seen the Medicaid expansion bill become enrolled, I anticipate that we'll see a lot of other movement on things that have been kind of slow in progress, especially tax reform. And so we'll be watching those bills very carefully to see if there's a fiscal impact or if we need to take some sort of action, and we'll be tormenting Bob probably 24/7 on those fiscal notes. As you know, Transit Day on the Hill has been rescheduled for the 21st, and we're hoping that we will not have a blizzard and that everyone can come and enjoy the day. We're tracking over 100 bills for compliance purposes, and 2 new bills have come out that I just thought I would briefly talk about today. One has to do with body cameras. Currently, our officers do not use body cameras, but this bill has a lot of consequences to it. So if there was an officer that was meeting with a manager or a supervisor, the officer would be precluded from turning off his camera. And I think that has kind of a chilling effect, and we'll watch that very carefully, because I think it's in the best interest for an officer to meet with a supervisor and manager and have a performance review or receive guidance without having to have that subject to public criticism. The other bill we're watching carefully is having to do with governmental immunity. This bill makes numerous changes, including when the immunity can be waived. It changes the aggregate caps, and it changes some of the processes for notices of claim. This is very troubling to a lot of the governmental entities, and we'll be working closely with the special districts and the league to express our concerns over this bill. Other than that, if you have questions, I'm willing to take them. Otherwise, I'm done.
Any questions from the board?
No.
Not right now. Thanks, Michelle.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks for your efforts there. We'll next go to our UTA advertising campaign. And I know, Beth, you've been working with our communications staff with Nicole Bardot and Andrea Packer and R&R Advertising. So we're excited to see where we are in the process.
Thanks.
Do you want to say anything leading into this, Beth, or should we turn the time over?
I think we should just turn the time over to
Okay.
the experts on this. But I just want to say it was been a great process, and I've really been happy with the engagement level. So.
And I just remind you to turn your mics on when you're ready to speak. So.
Thank you, Chair. This is really exciting for our team. I want to introduce myself. I spoke earlier, but I'm Nicole Bordeaux. I'm the Chief Communications and Marketing Officer here at UTA. With me is Andrea Packer. She's the Director of Communications, and our team, R&R, we have Patrick and Jen, and so we're going to do a presentation. And basically, this is the campaign for UTA, and the campaign really is talking about alignment. And, it's a new day here at UTA with the new leadership, and it's important for us to share that new message to the public, to the people that we serve. And it's exciting for us working with Trustee Holbrook on what that means and hearing from our governance, from our leaders, what that message should be. I think thinking back to the presentation we heard earlier today, we have great people here at UTA. We have people that care about what we do. And it's been a great opportunity. You're going to see this team worked really hard, hearing from the feedback that we've heard over the last few months about how we show and we express what that new day looks like under your leadership, under the new governance, and how we align that message throughout the agency. And we've been challenged to do that, and I hope that you are as excited as we are with this new campaign. I'm going to turn the time over to Andrea to talk about what campaign means, what that looks like in aligning a message, branding, and how we can express and tell our story and really show a new tone and a new face of UTA. So I'm going to turn the time over to our experts here. And
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Trustee Holbrook, too. It's been great to have you part. Just by way of a little bit of background and the process we go through as we build this campaign, is we do typically have kind of a general corporate campaign in any given year. And the underlying purpose is to maintain public and rider awareness of our services, the benefits of riding transit, and what transit brings to the community. So we do it to promote ridership, and just as people move and change jobs and come in from out of state, to maintain the awareness of the services that UTA provides. But in line with what Nicole just said, as we approached this campaign starting late last year, and we really wanted to make sure that the message concept and the strategy was in alignment with where the organization is today. The board's vision of focusing more on service and enhancing service where we can, and also on people, not just our riders, but the great employees, who are really, our neighbors and our friends and part of our community who work so hard to provide great service every single day. And so that was really the foundation of our strategy as we look to provide the right tone and the right message while still achieving the goals of awareness and ultimately, hopefully ridership. So with that, the overall campaign purpose, and as Nicole said, it's a new day at UTA, is we are driven to continually improve our services and what we provide to the community with our dedicated employees. We enhance and build new services where we can. We're venturing into areas of innovative mobility and more creative solutions. It ultimately, again, the benefits are to enhance mobility, reduce congestion, and clean air. So that's kind of the foundation we took in approaching this campaign. Go. I'm supposed to advance this. Sorry, guys. All right, so some of the specific goals that we had were, again, accountability. We always look when we're developing campaigns like this to focus on our riders and ensure we're meeting their needs, but also demonstrate to the general public our commitment to provide a good service and to maintain a basis of public support and awareness in the community, and ultimately to show UTA as being a fabric of the community and a part of our economic development and people moving where they need to go. As I mentioned, this campaign is particularly focused on people. As we went through past phases in the organization with the rail build out, we focused a lot on projects, and this is a very people-focused campaign. And Patrick will get into some of the fun stories we had during the shooting of it. But we're showing real riders, we're showing real employees from train hosts to operators to, to mechanics, and really showing the connections between our people and the people that we serve. And ultimately, as I mentioned, ridership. We always want to maintain awareness of our services, as I've mentioned, and reinforce the benefits that come with the services that we provide. You want to talk a little bit, or Jen?
So what you'll see is we went out and photographed real users of the system and real employees and created a contemporary look and feel of life along the Wasatch Front, with UTA being a key component of that. The spot feels very genuine and real as a result, and what we found is we didn't have to craft the story, that the people in the photographs really are the story, and they created that. So Pat will walk through our spot in the creative process.
Thank you. And the biggest thing with this whole process is we're bigger than just buses and trains. We're part of the community. We're part of something larger, and that's what we've tried to also get show in this. And we're improving quality of life for people along the Wasatch Front. I have the opportunity of interacting with more people at UTA than a lot of people get throughout photo shoots and meetings with other people. Everything from mechanics to operations people to operators to police and security, and warehouse people. And the great thing is no one's ever said to me in this time frame I've been doing this is, that's not my job. They've always said, let's find out. They've always brought a solution. They've always brought, they'll find answers. And it actually gets better every single day, I've noticed. When we were standing on the next slide here, maybe. I'll let you drive that. We were standing on North Temple platform. If you look in the center right, the girl in the blue shirt, she didn't know who we were. We were standing on the platform, and she was waving before the train had stopped. You can see her in the window, and she's waving to people. We had about 60 seconds for her to get off, take her picture, get her to sign a release, and get back on her way. And she was just happy. She was happy, and she's an ambassador. She's one of the 2,600 ambassadors that UTA have. Just fantastic people. We run across that every single time we're out there. Even the mechanics are the same way. It just doesn't matter. You've got that level of dedication, and I'll be honest, you can't get any more dedicated than Shelley Monson, who was here earlier. Just fantastic, dedicated people.
Yep, and I think what during the photo shoot, as we looked at some of the employees, we went to just about every business unit. We captured everything from the trolley buses to paratransit operators and riders, to all of our modes, and we captured photographs of real people in communities from Provo to Ogden and everywhere in between. So it really is about tying the community together and how we believe our services and our employees connect with our riders. And then ultimately we because this is a more of a still photo-based campaign, we have assets of about 25,000 photos that we'll be able to use going forward for other communication efforts and activities, and that's a tremendous asset that will benefit us for years to come. So we're really excited about that as well. And so just to describe, before we show the spot, we're going to show you the first of what will be 3 television spots. The first spot will begin airing next week, and then we'll roll out the other 2 spots during the course of the campaign. The total campaign is about 10 weeks, and in addition to the television on networks and cable, we also have social media and boosted Facebook posts. We have a digital and online component to the campaign for the entire 10 weeks, and we have connected TV, which gets to people who don't subscribe to cable or a network and are unplugged, and so we want to make sure we reach those. And still, as the research shows that with audiences 18 and above, television is still the way to go and the best bang for your buck. But in this day and age, with social media and digital assets, our campaigns have become more diverse with that respect. Whoa! Here we go, guys.
Here we go.
It started really fast.
Drum roll. Okay. Here we go.
Do I need to back it up, Patrick?
What connects us? Wanting to be better today than yesterday, which is why we're constantly enhancing service. The hope of cleaner air for our children, which is why we're using more efficient vehicles. And the desire to keep moving forward, by taking 160,000 cars off the road every day. There's more that connects us than ever before, and we're happy to help connect Utah. UTA, a better today for a better tomorrow.
So, like I said, that's the first of 3 spots. They're all very similar in theme and message, and featuring more photos of actual riders and actual employees. So we're really excited about this campaign, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, first of all, I'm glad that you didn't require the board to do a dancing routine as part of this commercial, because that would have been a killer right off the start. But
I'll jot that down for a future idea.
Yeah, no, drop that, please.
You did put it out there.
I love the idea of, and thank you for, I know we had some early conversations, but I wished we had video screens on our vehicles, from the standpoint of it reminds our customers the good things that the employees around them do and who they are, and maybe somewhere we'll figure out how to do that, going forward. But I'd love to figure out other vehicles to get sort of those pictures out there in different ways, just because I think, as you point out, our employees really tell our story probably a lot better than we will.
Yes.
Yes.
And so but I love the avenue and the approach, and well, it'd be fun to see what happens after 10 weeks, and maybe beyond. So.
Thank you.
Yes, I think this is really important to focus in on some of our employees, because I've been, I'm the new guy. So many of the employees, the operators, they didn't know who I was, still don't know, and yet I met with the cheery welcomes, and so is everybody, and they're taking care of people and the riders. It's really amazing to see them work. So I'm hopeful that we continue to focus in on those employees, and that the employees see the advertising being done for their organization. I think that'll be very helpful.
We are sending employees a link to be able to preview it today before it starts airing next week. And I do want to thank, and I'm sure Pat would as well, all of the business units and all of the directors. I mean, there's always a degree of flexibility that's required. If we have inclement weather at one location spot, and everybody is always so willing to help us and to be flexible and to provide what we need. And so we couldn't have done this without the support of the whole organization.
One thing I wanted to say.
Please, no, go.
Getting into this process just a little bit and just seeing kind of the surface and kind of getting a visual of what you are wanting to showcase was such a fascinating thing. And it was actually really powerful just seeing all of these different faces and how engaged everyone was, and hearing your stories about that, and knowing that exists right now, that is the story today. And so getting all of that, learning of all of your dedication and all of your ideas all encompassed in this was really wonderful. And I can't thank you enough in the sense that I think that you really heard a little bit about what I was saying and what everyone else had engaged in, and just really came up with a superlative product. So thank you. I appreciate your work. And thank you both as well.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I think we're there, right? Okay. Well, we'll look forward in anticipation to both the link and to next week. So thanks for your work on it.
Andrea, how often will this be shown on TV?
Oh, I don't have the specifics of the schedule off the top of my head. We are a little bit more heavier in the initial weeks of the campaign.
Right.
And then as it goes through the week of April 14th, it will taper off a little bit. So we typically start with the bigger build, more frequency, and more exposure in the initial weeks.
But this will be across all of the channels?
Yep, networks and cable TV.
Cable.
And then, as I mentioned, the connected TV, which does get to people who watch streaming shows through their apps or online and are not plugged into cable or satellite television.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
One other thing I wanted to say, thank you internally, our internal employees, for your hard work and dedication and taking my my suggestions and really working with them. So thank you. This was a great project.
Thank you.
Thanks. Our next item up for discussion is our service planning implementation process. And Laura Hansen is on deck. Steve, while Laura is coming up, did you have anything you wanted to say about the advertising campaign? Or I'm assuming you got a chance to see it at some point.
I did. I think it's excellent. It's great work by the team, and I think the public will really enjoy it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we want a planned service? Just kidding. Tell us about our going forward, how we're going to help us decide what the right service level is.
We do want to plan service. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm happy to be here with you today. At a couple of previous meetings, you've heard about a TOD and a capital development process. So we're doing something similar for service planning. The idea here is to make sure that we've got a really transparent, predictable, and consistent approach to service planning decisions. And with this new process, we're trying to be really explicit and deliberate in how we engage with the local governments, and then also approval periods for both the Board of Trustees and the local advisory boards. So we're excited to work towards this. I think a lot of times our community members know that we do service planning, but they don't know exactly how it happens. And all of a sudden there's changes on the ground, and so we want to be able to explain exactly how that happens. So our process is a 4-phase process. It begins with a 30-year vision with the regional transportation plans and really ends with deployment of service on the ground. If you can think of sifting soil, first you shake your sifter and you get out kind of the big rocks, and those are the big major capital projects like rail line extensions. Shake it a little bit thinner and you get some of the pebbles. Those are more our local bus service and demand response, and then ultimately you get down to the sand, which is the actual schedules of the bus, the locations of the bus stops, the really fine-grained details. And so our process is designed to sift, or to kind of go through that same process. The very first phase is the Regional Transportation Plan update process. This is a process that's updated every 4 years and is led by our MPO partners. I saw Ted Knowlton from Wasatch Front Regional Council here. They and Mountain Lands AOG do a great job with these planning processes. And really the content that ends up in these regional transportation plans is very much community driven. They have a 2-phase public engagement process as part of this. UTA is a key stakeholder. In fact, Carrie Dono, my team, works almost daily with our MPOs in developing models and scenario planning tools to figure out what planning projects we can afford and what the costs are of each of those. And so the MPOs lead this process. It has 2 engagement periods. First, a collecting of issues and needs from the local governments, development of a plan, phasing of the plan, and then bringing it back out to the community to say, did we get it right? And what do you think about that? So, and then once you get to the outcome of this 30-year visioning plan, there's two different tracks that projects can take. If they're major capital projects like a rail line or a BRT, they go through the capital development planning process that Mary's talked to you about. And if it's more service related, it goes through the service planning process, which I'll describe in more detail. The approval of this phase in the document really lands with the MPOs, with their advisory and policy committees. Again, we're a key stakeholder and partner on all of this process, but this is really their part of the project, or the planning process. The second phase...
Can I ask a question on that?
Oh, yeah, please.
And I think I know this. Is that... we go through the MPO because it's really the right thing to do, but is that also a required thing to do? Meaning, is that a part of our federal requirements?
It is. So one of the key components of the regional transportation plan process is phasing and guidance of federal dollars. And so we work closely with the FTA and the Federal Highways Administration in this process as well. And really it takes takes all of our visions for long-range major projects and breaks them up into 3 different phases, the first 10 years, the next 10 years, and the next 10 years. After that, it's based on a lot of funding assumptions. But in order to be able to receive federal funding, we have to have this plan in place. Yeah.
Laura, really quick, thank you. Can you kind of describe some of the people that are engaged in WFRC and MAG and kind of who they are within the community as well? And I think that's a critical part too.
Sure, yeah. So the MPOs, they have multiple planning committees and a decision-making policy committee. They're all made up of elected officials from local governments, as well as members of the UTA board, and we have some non-voting positions on there, as does UDOT as well. And so when these plans are approved, it is really approval by the local governments. There is a group of elected officials that make up that committee. They develop or suggest needs that go into this plan, and then they approve it. And so what we are implementing thereon is really requests from the local governments at that point. And so if projects were to move up in priority in terms of which gets completed first, we'd have to update this plan with the approval of all of those local governments. Does that help?
Thank you.
So the second phase of the process, we're getting to our pebbles now. If you take the major capital projects out of the RTP, now we're talking about our local bus service, we're talking about demand response service, kind of the innovative mobility solutions types of things that we're working on. And really what we get down to doing day-to-day here at UTA. We update this plan on a 2-year cycle, and the goal is really to create an annual work plan for the next 5 years. So we have great predictability and understanding of what's going to happen in 2019 and 2020 and 2021 for our service planning implementation. The process really mirrors the same regional transportation planning process. If you look at the boxes on this chart, they match with that in the regional transportation planning process. The goal here is to create something that's familiar, build off of an existing structure that's very successful. Again, we'll meet with local governments, ask for their input, develop a draft plan, bring it back and say, did we get it right? Do you agree with what's in here? Do we need to make some adjustments? The approval of this plan falls first with our local advisory board and then the board of trustees. And we're excited right now because we're transitioning into this new process with the UTA Service Choices effort, which we've talked about a little bit, and the graphics on the right illustrate that. We want to make sure that we're being very deliberate and giving this a lot of resources in terms of our staff time and expertise in really doing this first round of this planning process well and making sure that the community knows that they have lots of opportunity to provide input. When we get to phase 3, we're really beginning the implementation of these planning processes. First, we want to make sure that we go back to the local governments and say, hey, do you remember we went through this RTP planning process and then we went to through a 5-year mobility planning process? This is what we decided that we were going to do in terms of local service in your community. Do you remember that? Does that still meet your city's objectives? And just take a pulse there with local governments. Everyone should know what the plan is at this point. And once we feel like we're moving forward in the right direction, the local governments are still on board, we'll go through a robust process of blocking, scheduling, run cutting, all of the things that we need to do in order to actually implement and design this service. We'll have a public hearing, so yet another public engagement opportunity to come back and say, this is what's being proposed. Does this work for you? Does it not? Are there any major issues that we didn't see that we didn't anticipate, but that they see? And in the past, we have had some comments come out and say, you know what, this doesn't work for us. And we've gone back to the drawing board and put those ideas on hold and said, okay, let's take another look at this. So if that happens, we'd put it back in the beginning of the 5-year planning process hopper. In addition, we have a Title VI analysis. This is something that's federally required to determine whether or not the changes have disparate impacts on low-income or minority populations. And that is something that's required for the Board of Trustees to approve. So assuming everything goes well there, then we move into actual implementation of the service itself. We are directing all major service changes to the August change day. Again, this makes sure that it's really predictable. Every change has had a chance to go through this public process, make sure everyone understands exactly what's happening and there are no surprises. The April and December change days are reserved for the ski service, starting and ending. And there may be some, extenuating circumstances where we've got a critical safety issue or reliability has dropped below a critical threshold where we need to make changes and be a little bit more nimble. But for the most part, we're trying to drive everything to this August change day so that everyone has the opportunity to see the process happen. And finally, this is just one piece of a suite of tools that we have to guide service planning. We are developing this process and also an accompanying policy that I've been working with Lisa Bowman on. We'll bring that to you in a next meeting. We also have a service planning overview, which is kind of a primer on all of the things that go into service planning, the different types of things that we consider as transit planners to design effective service. We also have some service design guidelines, which are performance standards, so we can evaluate whether our routes are meeting their performance metrics or not. We have the 5-year mobility plan, which becomes an annual work plan for us and comes out of this process. We have a bus stop master plan that we're just finalizing, and I know that you have some interest in that, and so we'll be coming back to you all at a later meeting to talk about that in more detail. And then finally, we have a comprehensive system analysis tool, which takes those service design guidelines, evaluates our service against that, and determines whether a project or a route is performing the way that it should or not, and what are the root causes why. I think that's the most important thing. Do we have the schedule wrong? Do we need to get a company on a corporate pass program and that would suddenly change it? Maybe the schedule's off just a little bit, or maybe it's just in the wrong place and we need to look at different service there. So the recommendations out of that would go back into informing the 5-year planning process. So that's a quick overview of everything we've got. Lots of great tools that we're developing, and it's really going to advance our ability to make good service planning decisions moving forward.
Process-wise, does this go to the advisory board for any sort of comments or feedback or
yeah, if you
recommendations?
Go back to phase 2. I don't know if this has a...
I was thinking of this process more than...
Oh, the overall.
Yeah.
Yes, so this whole process, this whole structure here, we will be presenting to the local advisory board as well, I think on February 20th? Yeah, February 20th. So we'll presenting this to them, walk them through the same presentation, get their take on it, and if we feel like we've missed the mark, we can go back and revise it, but that's the plan, is to bring this process to them.
Okay. Ken, did you have a question? I saw your mic go on.
You've made this presentation to a number of groups so far. What's been the feedback from them on this planning process that you lay out here? Have you heard back from some of these organizations where I've seen you make this presentation? What have they said?
Well, we've talked a little bit about the UTA Service Choices study that we have getting going. We haven't spent a ton of time on this overall process thus far. But the feedback that I have heard is we haven't always understood how UTA's made service planning decisions, and so it's helpful to have a process that really lays it all out. Historically, we've really gone from the regional transportation planning process right to all of a sudden it's change day and changes are happening, and it hasn't been real clear to the community and the public what's happened in between. We've had a very robust process that we've gone through internally, but it hasn't been quite as explicit, and so this is giving that process a little bit more daylight and being more deliberate about how we engage with the community. So I think the general sense is going to be that people are happy about having a clear process that explains how they can engage and how decisions are made. And in terms of the UTA Service Choices study, which is kind of our first iteration of developing this 5-year plan, we've had good response to that so far. I think there's been some misunderstanding among the community, and I think it's obvious because it's it's a complex thing that we can't be everything to everyone all the time. And we do need to make some choices and some trade-offs. And that's hard for everyone because we want everything, right? We have a consultant that's assisting us with that, and he uses an analogy of a plumber. So you have a leak under your sink, and he says, okay, I can fix this leak. Here's a cheap option, and here's a durable option. The cheap option will get you going, but you may have to replace it again in a couple of years, and the durable option is going to cost you more, but will take care of the leak for a longer period of time. Which do you want? And I think it's important to point out it's not cheap or durable. There's a spectrum of options in between, and where do we want to fall in terms of our values on that as a region. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Just to kind of go along that same vein, communities that don't have maybe commuter rail or tracks, but they have bus service, have they given any input that made you feel like service-wise we should, continue to focus on this and other things like that?
Yeah, I think that's a great opportunity that we have with this new 5-year plan is the RTP doesn't include local service. It is major projects and up. And so if you're a community that doesn't have a major project line on the map coming through you, maybe you feel like UTA is not listening to you. And I think this planning process will give us a tool that we can say, we are listening, we do have plans, and we recognize that you have needs, and here's exactly how we're planning to address that. And so I think it'll be a really important tool for us in terms of education and communication and relationship building with local governments, whereas the RTP is great at a really high level, but not everybody can be included in that just because the resources are limited. So.
That triggered a question, Laura, and we met last week with Riverton City and its mayor, and they indicated a transportation committee had been recently formed, and they were looking at some local transit routes. Salt Lake City recently did their own study, and we're on the verge of entering an agreement with them to help them implement that in a greater way. Do very many communities, they do a lot of local transportation road plans, but do they ever get into the local? You talk about this gap between the RTP and where we go, but do the communities themselves ever go through the exercise, or are we effectively going through that for them, and then that becomes that local plan?
I think it depends on the community. Salt Lake City is a great example where they took the initiative to develop their own master plan for transit with a lot of assistance and funding from UTA actually to support that. Lehigh City is talking about it doing a transit master plan as well. I know the city of Bluffdale is applying for one of those TLC grants to assist with a planning study there. But a lot of communities don't have the resources to do it themselves. Sorry, Annette. A lot of the local governments don't have the resources to do a big, robust study like that. And so that's a role that we can play in being a partner with them and helping provide some technical assistance and expand their capacity to do planning studies like this.
Okay. But, I mean, there's part of me that says wishes they did, and there's part of me that's like, if it doesn't align, how much do you want to do that? But then, on the other hand, I think I'd rather know up front. If it doesn't.
The other nice thing, I think, is that having this plan in place will show what we can do with our existing resources. Yeah. And anything that's above and beyond that, we now have a framework with that we're kind of piloting with Salt Lake City on how they could sponsor additional service. And so if a city desires something more than what our plan and our existing resources allow us to do, we have a mechanism to be able to allow those kinds of partnerships in the future.
Great. Beth.
Just one more question, and maybe it's just a comment too, but actually Bluffdale City, for instance, is a city that doesn't really have a lot of, certainly they don't have any or tracks, but this could be an opportunity as well for them to engage. If they're going for a TLC grant, then they're obviously talking to the regional planning group, WFRC, and maybe they can get that greater information down the road as well. Is that a pretty accurate? Yeah,
I think so. And also, it's hard. So we actually met with Bluffdale with Wasatch Front Regional Council a couple of months ago and said, well, which alignment would you prefer if the red line were to be extended? And they said, well, we haven't really even thought about it. And so it's hard for us to be able to be responsive to their needs when they haven't yet had the opportunity to go through that planning study themselves. And so the TLC grant program is a great mechanism to provide some support to some of these smaller communities that they're so busy with day-to-day work that they haven't had the opportunity to really think proactively about some of these major projects. And the 5-year planning process, because it falls below that major project level, gives us the opportunity to say, what kind of needs do you have in your community and how can we help be a partner in that? And maybe it's not a fixed route 40-foot bus. Maybe it's a demand response microtransit solution. But we want to be partners with those local governments.
Seeing no other questions, thank you, Laura. We'll look forward to feedback from the advisory board in a few weeks. Our next item is our TOD system analysis tool and criterion. And Paul Drake, it looks like you might be accompanied by the nefarious Ted Knowlton from WFRC. He's really not nefarious. He's very nice and capable individual. Sorry, Ted.
Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and trustees. I'm Paul Drake. I'm the Senior Manager of Real Estate and Transit-Oriented Development here at UTA. As the chair pointed out, I'm here with Ted Knowlton from WFRC, Wasatch Front Regional Council. We're here to discuss the TOD system analysis tool. With the hopes, we've included some information in your board packet for your review, and we hope to have a conversation about the concept of the tool, the various weighting for the criteria, and then get some input back from the board today, if that's possible. As you know, we've discussed at length the strategic plan, or the TOD strategic plan and policy. This tool is a key component of that strategic plan, and helps UTA to prioritize its TOD priorities going forward, and it allows the board to make informed decisions about those priorities. This has been a collaborative effort with several organizations. As mentioned, we have the Wasatch Front Regional Council, Mountain Land Association of Governments, Utah Department of Transportation, UTA, and then consultation with Echo Northwest and the University of Utah. We thank all those partners for their involvement. They contributed both time and funding to the creating of this tool. And at this point, I want to turn the time over to Ted.
All right, great. I'll just provide a few more introductory comments. One of the cool things, of course, about transportation planning in Utah is that we collaborate really well together. We have a group that meets and we talk about, well, what are needs and issues that we should address together. And one of them that we discussed was having a tool that could do two primary things. One is to help UTA understand, well, where might UTA focus new joint development TOD activities? One, and then two, more fundamentally, something that could help local governments understand how ready are you for TOD? How supportive of transit are you around existing stations? Could be used at new stations. Something that really gives them a performance feedback of, not just feeling like they are being transit supportive, but actually knowing and having criteria to break it down into some key pieces. So we engaged together, and just to reiterate, the partners, Wasatch Front Regional Council, MAG, UTA, UDOT, with UTA managing the effort, and pooled money together, selected a consultant, developed the scope of work, and we're really excited about this tool and the prospect, the potential it has to really inform local government and joint development activities for UTA. So, and I'm happy to sit up here and look good while Paul gets into the details.
Thank you, Ted. Any questions for as far as the partnership so far, or you want to get into the tool?
Well, I'm anxious to get into the tool. I will say, and Ted and I, in my prior role, had a lot of conversations about how do you define TOD, and also how do you indicate where an area is. In Salt Lake County, we had a lot of discussions and even had a national expert come in a number of years ago who did a brief analysis and basically said, for the size and density of Salt Lake County and even some of the broader metropolitan, you can have twice the town centers that we do. And sometimes we think of town centers as being blocks upon blocks, and they may be a half a mile or a mile at the most in their circumference. But a place where things could assimilate. And so getting to a definition, a common definition in the region, I think is going to be really important for a lot of reasons, just because, we all talk about it, but having this sort of a set standards of how do we measure that and how do we measure the progress in getting there, I think long-term beyond our TOD sites is going to be important. Because I think as we look at bus routes and other things, we're going to want to connect these locations up if there's not existing transit, or if we're looking at enhancements in transit. We're more inclined to go past more frequency past these locations than say just going down a highway but in and of itself. So, and I think as we met late last year I met with some of the city managers in Utah County who want to create a sort of a northern BRT line similar to UVX, and they're talking about what they can do in their cities. So having these standards, I think, will help facilitate that. One of the things, and I'm probably jumping ahead here, and we'll circle back to it, is and I don't know whether WFRC will go so far as to adopt these standards in a formal way. But I'm even thinking, Paul, in our own sake, and as the staff's, this group goes through and analyzes these potential TOD sites based on these criteria, there'd be some value in us maybe in our next meeting adopting the standards formally as a board, so that as a recovering politician, you always know that people are paranoid, and that their immediate thing is to blame staff and say, well, staff did this, or they looked at it funny, and it'd be nice to be able to say, no, these are the adopted criteria that were adopted before any sites were identified. Now, we may come back and modify those things, and after a round or two, and we say, well, this probably needs to be tweaked here or adjusted here, and you go through some, short process, and then, readopt those revised standards. But I just think, to the degree that those have some conformity in the discussions, and I know you're looking at economic development as a new part of the RTP, I just think having those interwoven in that conversation and being able to point to them probably helps all the parties involved.
I think that's a great idea.
Long discussions. So
we will certainly take it to Wasatch Front Regional Council and have the conversation about it as well.
Yeah. Anyway,
from the standpoint of staff, we're happy for the board to be the heavy. You guys can take the heat for us. No, I think that's an excellent idea, and we felt that it was important that these criteria and the weighting didn't come just from UTA staff. That's why we did we're fortunate enough to have this collaborative group, but then it definitely needs to have the endorsement of those groups as well as the UTA board. I think that's an excellent suggestion.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to stop you, and looking forward to your presentation.
All right, thank you. Again, the purpose of that stakeholder group was to identify the key metrics, and we sent you those diagrams. We'll go through those in just a moment. And then also to identify the data where it actually lives, so that we can keep the tool up to date with those. with those metrics. A lot of the data is dispersed throughout the stakeholder groups, and they keep those up to date just through the course of their work, and so that will help keep this tool relevant and current. And then have a recommendation from the stakeholder group on the assigning of appropriate weights to those. And those we want to go over those with the board today and make sure that we're reflecting the board priorities in that regard. The diagrams that were provided in your handout, they map out the relationship of each metric to the key metrics. If you pull those out, I don't know if we've got a slide that shows that. Yep, we do. Okay, this one here is your first diagram. It's basically for reference. The blue criteria, the four there, municipal support, accessibility, market strength, and affordable housing need. Those were mentioned in the strategic plan. There's also one additional metric, land availability, but that one is basically a function of is land available and how much. So these are the ones that require mapping, require a little bit more detail. The brown layer right below those four key criteria, these are the sub-criteria. They feed up. Municipal support is defined and demonstrated by a high station area plan score. That's basically, has the city gone through the process of a station area plan, and how well have they tried to implement the recommendations of those station area plans. The next is TOD supportive zoning. We would like to obviously prioritize those sites where the cities have already put zoning in place, so that that makes it easier for us as we move forward. Planning for affordable housing. This is related to the moderate income housing plan that's required by the state. If the cities have done one and that it has scored highly, those sites will be prioritized. Establishment of some vehicle for capturing TIF. Usually this is a CRA, or according to the last legislation, could be a TRZ, a transportation reinvestment zone. And then accessibility, which is the next blue main criteria, demonstrated by transit accessibility. And that means what kind of housing, jobs, services, amenities can be reached by transit. The next one is transit frequency. That's broken down by mode, and each one of those has its own weight. Next is accessibility for pedestrians and cyclists, so other alternative forms of transportation. And then the last is projected mode share, meaning what's the current and projected use of alternative transportation. Next is market strength. That's demonstrated by developer or tenant interest. We've talked about that in the past. We do receive developer interest here in my department. We have the development community contacting us regularly. We also have input from communities when they have heard of developer interest around the station.
How do you measure that, though?
We did have to quantify it somehow, and it's fairly simple. There's three basic rankings, and it has to do with if there is developer interest, what kind of development are they interested in doing at the site, and then what is the likelihood. So we need to, or what we've done is quantify that. I think that there are three tiers. Basically, highest tier would be there's a lot of development interest in doing transit-oriented development, as opposed to no interest or interest in doing industrial uses or agricultural, for instance, right? Go ahead.
Is that interest from the city or from the developer, or some mix of both?
Mix of both. Okay. Mm-hmm. Any other questions on that? Okay. Next would be these are metrics that are tracked by the metropolitan planning organizations, as well as I understand University of Utah, but mid and long-term development potential, and then projected growth rate. The next is affordable housing need. Last one there, that's demonstrated by metrics that are also are tracked by the metropolitan planning organizations. That's Vulnerable Housing Communities Index, Housing Vulnerability Index, and then the last one is actually an inverse of what is the existing affordable housing stock in that area.
Paul, I just had a quick question.
Please.
Could you really define, I think in part, so that anybody looking at this could understand, what is the difference between Vulnerable Communities Index and the Housing Vulnerability Index? Kind of maybe define that a little bit?
Pardon me, I don't know if I can answer the second part, which is the Housing Vulnerability Index, but the vulnerable communities is defined based on income, racial composition, and presence of zero-car households. And so we look at those three indices, and if there's a high ratio of a population in an area that is in one or more of those categories, then we define it as a vulnerable community.
The advisory board, or at least portions of it, when we met last January, talked about the need for affordable housing and whether our projects would, favor that. How does that get looked at? Is that sort of manifest itself in the local moderate income housing plan? I mean, how are we sort of taking that aspect into control as far as giving them maybe some favorable outcomes in the analysis?
You bet. Let me show that. So this is just an overall for reference of all the metrics that we're tracking. It's actually interpreted a few different ways. So the first way is overall. This is the low-hanging fruit. The second way is what we're calling a growth opportunity site. These are the sites that if UTA were to do a joint venture there or some kind of transit-oriented development, then that could potentially catalyze transit supportive development throughout the district. You can see in both of those, the affordable housing needs score is grayed out. So that one is held out on its own, and this is to augment these other two. So you have each site, regardless of how you look at it, whether it's overall TOD is going to happen anyway, or whether it's a catalytic site, we will score those based on its suitability for affordable housing. There's also affordable housing scores that are intermixed within both the overall TOD score and the growth opportunity score. You can see under municipal support, both of those take into account whether the city is supportive of, or if they've created their moderate income housing plan, and then the score of that moderate housing income plan. Also, whether they're supportive of mix of uses, accessibility, high intensity development, etc. There is one thing that I'll point out here is that there are two boxes underneath the TOD supportive zoning that are grayed out that shouldn't be. Those are specifically about the zoning. So if the city has zoned for high intensity residential uses and has their moderate housing income plan done, it has scored highly. Those sites will be prioritized above others, and then you'll have the additional layer as the board when you're making your decisions. Is there affordable housing need, and is this a suitable site for affordable housing? Does that make sense? Okay.
Paul, I have a question as well.
Please.
A lot of these ask for some kind of score or an index. Where do you get that information to start the analysis here?
As I alluded to before, that was basically our first step in putting as a steering committee and putting together these metrics, is to identify, well, one, what are the key metrics, and two, do we have the data to support these
Yeah,
metrics.
what's the source of the data that then you stick in there to evaluate?
A lot of them are coming from the MPOs, the RAM. What does that stand for? I forget.
The real estate market model that we use to make growth projections.
So these are outside groups that are also looking at the area, and they're coming up with various scores, and we're picking and choosing from among them to do some evaluation for our particular site.
Correct. These are metrics that are being tracked for other related purposes, but they have been identified as useful within this this filter.
All right.
Can I add up briefly on that? And a chunk of them also come from understanding where a local government is at and where they want to go. And so it might be data that we have, but it really is data that comes from them. So some of it we generate, some of it is pulling together what they say that where they are at, or what they have up on their websites relative to plans and ordinances.
All right.
So those are the ones that are, from this standpoint, automatically updated. We also have ones like, for instance, the station area plan score. We know we have a list of which station areas are complete. We have information from interior to UTA on what our transit service is. So various sources. We also have sources up at the University of Utah that have been offered for this effort, and those are included here.
And maybe just one additional quick thing. One of the things that we all tried to pay attention to, and we'll see how it actually goes, but is ease of updatability, and not having data sources that take so much work to update that then this doesn't become a living and usable tool on an ongoing basis.
Good point. Go ahead.
Who's pulling all that data together? Are you collectively doing it as a group? Are we housing it? Are WFRC housing it?
Depends on the data source, yeah. So we will have those partners housing that data. It is being pulled together by this tool that's being developed by our consultant, Echo Northwest, in collaboration with the University of Utah.
Okay. The only reason I say that is at some point, and I realize, this is light years beyond where we were even a few years ago, that to the degree that it can be parked somewhere where municipalities could go and sort of litmus, see which way the wind's blowing in regards to their thing, is going to be beneficial in the long term. I think it's one thing to have them adopted as sort of standards, and then I think it's another if they can go and look at it and run their own scenarios through it somehow in a useful way.
I think it's really wise what you're bringing up now, and I'm not in the day-to-day conversations with the project team, but I think that if we don't clarify together the roles and responsibilities of updating this, then that's a big risk, and we have to attend to that. So I appreciate you raising that.
Yeah, back to the I'm going to call it the wrong thing, the quality communities, the sustainability grant that now is probably about 8 years.
Yeah, Sustainable Communities Initiative.
There was a tool that was supposed to come out of that, and I don't know whether that's even used anymore. But I think something that the long-term desire was that was a tool that communities, as they went through their planning efforts, could utilize and sort of help guide them in their decision making. They may make conscientious decisions not to go down that road, and that's fine. I don't think we're telling them what they have to do, but if they have a way to measure that, I think that's going to be helpful long term.
Absolutely, and we hope this is a reference tool for our communities, even the development community. I'll go into a little bit more detail. Overall score. This is the first diagram and first way that we're looking at these metrics. As I said, this is trying to identify the low-hanging fruit. The characteristics of a high-scoring TOD site would be is that obviously there's high municipal support, scoring high there, and all of the subcategories that it's scoring highly in accessibility and scoring highly, obviously, in the market. We can go into the weighting right now. Each of those criteria are weighted the same. Pari passu, you've got a third on each one. Our finance department has pointed out that it neglects to put 33.3%. So that's a negligence on my part. But those are a third each, and then there's various weighting of the sub criteria beneath on the brown line.
And each of those should add up to 100?
It should. Yep.
Okay, just check.
I'm doing the math real quick in my mind.
It's
I'm pretty
the
sure.
rounding.
The first one doesn't.
It's the rounding. It's rounding.
Yes,
rounding. I should have gone out a few more decimal places. I'm sorry.
Nah.
Trustee.
The only time a finance person will say it's rounding, and it's okay.
We'll just assume you've truncated it. So.
He's changed 21 to 22 and the kind of thing.
Yeah, and these, just for context, they've come from weighting in the tool that has already been inputted by the steering committee. There's various ways of doing it. The way that the tool works is you can is that every weight is normalized. You can one person can put it in a score of 1 to 5, another person can put it in a score of 1 to 10. That's all normalized, and then you see the percentages where it comes out. So you can see on municipality score, it's more heavily weighted towards if there's tax increment financing included, affordable housing, and transit supportive zoning and station area plan are about a quarter each, I guess.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Well, why the heavy weighting toward TIF? I mean, sometimes you don't have to have TIF in order for something to be good. I mean, is that, we know that that's important for our TOD success, or I mean, why such a weight toward that?
That's my guess. A lot of the TOD sites are currently under surface parking lots.
Yeah.
And so really there's no development opportunity until there is some kind of funding available to structure that parking. So that's my guess of why the steering committee weighted that so high. And again, it's not. I don't see that it's significantly higher than the other criteria, but I think that was a factor in their minds. Okay, and again, we're soliciting input from the board. If these weights seem to be off to you, we would love to have your feedback. Now, under accessibility score, those all did score relatively similar, about a quarter on each for transit accessibility, transit frequency, bike ped accessibility, and predicted mode share. So those came in fairly even under market strength. You can see that this one is even more heavily weighted towards what is the developer interest. And I believe that the other ones are weighted lower because they're more projected, kind of planning or aspirational. Whereas I believe the steering committee felt that today's interest is a great indication or a stronger indication of readiness in the market. Anyway, any questions on that?
Yeah, I'm just going back to the TIF thing. And having been on the side of municipalities coming to county looking for tax increment deals, sometimes, and they're developing out there, and it started last year in the legislative session, some mechanisms other than TIF to get to parking structures, but so I just wonder if that, for me, I'd be more motivated by a city that gone through the actual zoning process than even the tax incremental financing process, just because if you were picking sites or because the TIF will come later on down the road, or it could be put together fairly quickly once a good need is articulated. But So I don't know whether, and if my colleagues feel differently, then I'm not possessed with this, but I almost wonder if it's more like, I don't know, 26 in zoning is 26 or something like that. Kind of split the difference a little bit.
If I could, go ahead, Trustee, and then I'll add some information.
So I hear what you're saying, I think, in the theoretical, but I think from the counteractive or from looking at it from the city's perspective, a lot of times these development projects come at them in different waves, and they get different type of feedback and different input. And for them to be able to tell their communities that, oh, look, this is kind of why this funding mechanism is in place, I can actually see why that does have that criteria value. I think that to talk about, if I have a site that's near transit and it's just this empty field right now, it's an easier mechanism for the city to say, okay, I can modify that zoning, I can make those changes, than it is to say, oh yeah, I'll get somebody else to write a check. That to me makes sense. So I do understand what you're saying. I think that from a practical perspective, it's a lot easier to say, yeah, funding. Yes, we can continue the development and momentum. And I think that also allows the city to have some type of a, if some of this is clearly market driven and developer driven. And so that part of it is going to be the developer saying, yeah, this is the type of zoning I could anticipate seeing. So I can see that being a more collaborative portion as opposed to the funding. But, that would be my perspective on that.
I think that's an excellent perspective on that, and definitely it is more difficult to put a CDA or a TRZ in place and to get the participation from the taxing entities. The other thing I think that came into the conversation, and I remember it now, is that we do have transit-oriented developments, joint ventures where the developer went after the tax increment financing. And in almost every case, they captured the majority of that value. So I think some of the consideration for this is that this would be a value capture proposition, where if the agency has to structure a parking lot, that it's not an undue burden on the agency and its position within the future joint venture or whatever structure it ends up being. The public gets to capture that value. Any other questions?
I had another question about, so I'm looking at the accessibility scores and the rankings of the predicted mode share. And I see the tremendous value of that when you're talking within the framework of Salt Lake County, or maybe even like a Davis County or northern Utah County. But how would that really be, that weight level in, say, a county that's more in the development phase in terms of that? Does that make sense? And so yes, I totally understand why you'd have that, but at the same time, if you're looking at, say, northern Weber County, or South Utah County, Spanish Fork, how is that mode share? There's like a different type of level of mechanism to implement that, and I'm just wondering about the weighting on that part of that.
Yeah, and that's a fair concern, and that kind of gets at the logic behind splitting our interpretation of this data. So again, at this overall score, we're trying to identify the sites where TOD is going to happen anyway. That people are already out on their bikes and walking regularly. There's a lot of amenities in the area. Basically, if UTA doesn't develop there, then we're just standing in the way of a great
something
project.
else happening.
Yeah. Now, on the next one, in the growth opportunity score, you can see that those metrics are not as, they're taken off. So we're recognizing that there are areas where there's not going to be existing great accessibility, and people aren't out on their bikes all the time because they're afraid for their life, right? But those are the places where we would like to go in there, perhaps, if the board prioritizes it that way, and do a catalytic project that would encourage that kind of development, that would add additional amenities in the area, that would add accessibility, that would make it safer for peds and bikes. So that's the impetus, I guess, for the bifurcation of those. Thank you. Other questions? While we're here, let's get into our the weighting as far as the growth opportunity score sites. So again, these are the catalytic sites. Trying to identify those. You'll see that that municipal support is identical to the other. Just checking, make sure I'm not telling you wrong. And then accessibility, as I just mentioned, this is less prioritized. Transit is still high priority. We want to make sure that there is transit there if we're going to do a transit-oriented development. And then the various modes are going to prioritize one or the other. But then where we're talking about predicted mode share, current accessibility is less important than future or projected, the 2050 aspirational mode share. So we want to look at where transit-oriented development is aspiring to happen, and then be a partner or a catalyst to make that happen. And then market strength. This one is probably even higher weighted. What I'm looking at is the difference between I guess the developer interest has gone up some, as has the projected. Excuse me. I guess the midterm development potential has gone up a little bit, and then the other two have, or long-term development has gone down. I'm not exactly sure. My guess is that the steering committee felt that in a growth opportunity score, what is important is the willingness of the city and the development community to come in and do something, even though it might not be it might not be just the what's already happening within the area, I guess. Anyway, questions on that? Go ahead.
Paul, I had a question in regards to the projected growth rate. Can you tell me what determined that, and what that percentage is, or how that looks like, and how long term that is? Is it a 50-year projection? Is it a 20-year projection? Kind of where they establish some guidelines on that, especially in a growth opportunity site.
Right, exactly. So there's little notes on the bottom, and I don't fault you for not reading them. But the fine line says that the midterm projections are 10-year growth, and then the long-term ones are 2050, which are more aspirational. I think those that are more aspirational or long-term, the steering committee put less weight on those, weight on midterm and short-term development potential. Okay, if there's no more questions, then I'll get into the affordable housing site score. You can see that the market strength has completely dropped off. Municipal support, accessibility are still high on the priority list, as is, of course, the affordable housing needs score. You can see the weighting. I'm not sure why the steering committee dropped station area plan score completely off. I guess that's because it's going to be included in the other two perspectives regardless, and then this one is focused primarily on affordable housing need. What are the amenities in the area? Can you get to them by transit, by bike, by walking, and then what is of course the affordable housing need? Questions on this one and the weighting? That's all we have as far as the diagrams. thank you for your input so far. Is there any other comments? I guess I wanted to revisit, if we can, what you were talking about, Mr. Chair. Is this?
But I think Beth spoke to that, and I'm okay with it. I don't think those 4% points will change dynamics a lot. I do think increasingly, in particular in some counties, you'll see these projects moving forward without TIF participation, particularly if there's a heavy housing focus. And so, let's see how it goes. I just worry that some of those projects will get disadvantaged a little bit when especially in this current market, there's enough other side market to it, enough that they don't have to have the TIF piece to go forward. And so that's the only place that sort of gives me a little bit of pause, but I'm happy to see how it goes.
Okay.
One question I did have, a mayor from one of our communities stopped me and said somehow their site ended up ranked 4th, and I'm like, well, I don't think any sites have really been ranked yet.
No, the sites haven't been ranked yet, and we're still working on the tool. There's some calculation errors within the programming that we're still working through. So no,
I'm not sure where they got that. I think he understood that we had 3 potential TOD sites available to us based on the current statute, but somehow he thought the rankings had already taken place, and I was like scratching my head. So
I think I've heard a lot of concern from cities that they know that we've got 3, and they're concerned about being 4th or 5th or whatever and being left out.
Okay.
So that's a valid concern.
So that just brings me to, that has made me think of a question in terms of how are we going to be able to communicate this to those cities that we have this tool available? Does that make sense so that they can utilize it?
We have been in contact with a lot of cities, especially those who are doing stationary plans, about this tool, and they're well aware of it. There's also going to be information on our website available when we do finalize the tool.
What's their assessment of the tool?
Say that again?
They are aware of the tool itself. What's their assessment of its usability?
I'm not sure yet. They haven't seen it or played with it. It's going to come to the board first.
All right.
I think we'd love to have this be pretty heavily marketed, or there's a clear reference to it from all of the different partners' websites, certainly ours. If it's amenable to the partners, that it's part of the Wasatch Choice framework to help communities understand how they're doing, things like that we could explore.
We would certainly encourage it. I think it's better for them to self-evaluate through your website than ours, meaning we would use the tool, and certainly we would use it in regards to our TOD components, but as they're evaluating themselves overall, it strikes me that's probably more in the line of our MPOs, that our partners, in doing that analysis. So, but we would want to be supportive of you and help you to develop that tool from a usability standpoint.
Very good.
Well, if we were, when do you think, if we were to sort of adopt the criteria, is that ready for next week? Is it a few weeks out?
I think that we could come back to the board to adopt the criteria, and then we have planned subsequent conversations with the board that we can actually show you the tool. We can, and then we'll show you how it's ranking sites. Those are subsequent ones. I think that we can be ready for next week to bring back the same information and have the board adopt it if you're comfortable.
Is there any disagreement with that thought, or?
No, I think that sounds good.
It's okay.
Be good.
All right. Well, if you can work to that end, if somehow it doesn't work for next week, then we can figure that out. But
happy to.
And if I could chime in for just a little bit,
please,
the intent is to give you 3 scores and see the communities that are ready to be scored, see them stacked up, overall TOD, growth opportunity, and affordable housing. So the board can decide which of those areas is most important to you as you evaluate it. So rankings may be different based on each of those scores.
Okay.
So it's not going to be one big score. You're going to see 3 different scoring.
Sure, you're trying to make it complicated for us.
Trying to make sure you understand how the scores
what our
work
options
and
are.
what your options are.
And we can interpret it based on the board's objectives, and make educated decisions is the point.
Well, and I could see if we have a site that maybe is number 2 in a couple sections, you might choose that site just simply because you accomplish 2 different areas that might be a little different than some who, I mean, if one gets number 1 in all of them, I think that becomes a no-brainer, but there might be some way you look at the other ones as well, so, or a combination. Well, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Ted, for your efforts, and for the rest of our partners in that effort. Our last item for discussion in Section 10 is our Ogden BRT environmental study, and we have Mary Delaretto and Hal Johnson.
Hi, Hal's actually going to make the presentation, but I'll sit here for moral support.
Okay. And you got to turn the mic on, Hal, and we know you'll need it. So there you go.
Okay, got it. Thank you. So thank you for the opportunity to give you an update on the Ogden BRT project. Just have a few slides here about the project. So these are the project partners we've been working with for the last 6 or 7 years on the project. So Intermountain Healthcare, Wasatch Front Regional Council, Weber County, Ogden City, UDOT, and Weber State University have all been project partners and funding contributors to the efforts so far. Kind of the purpose of the project is really looking at, why do we make these kind of investments? It's to make the bus system work better, to make the train system work better. The goal of the project is very similar to our Utah County UVX project, to better connect Front Runner to the city, as well as we have something similar with the university, as well as we've got a hospital in the corridor and downtown. So we're trying to connect those key destinations. We're really looking to get more students on the system. That's where we've seen big ridership growth on the transit line, is through the student programs. Ogden City, part of their participation in the project, they want to see the corridor revitalized. There's a lot of opportunity for transit-oriented development, following up on Paul's discussion, and we've done a lot of market analysis looking at market and how much TOD potentially could happen in the corridor, as well as improve air quality and reduce congestion in the corridor. So it's so those are the overall project goals. Mary presented at the board meeting, I believe, last week, this flow chart. So wanted to kind of follow up on that and kind of show you where we're at relative to the flow chart. So we're kind of moving towards the implementation end of the project. So we've just finishing up the environmental process. So we had a public hearing back in January. We've gone through all the comments. We've sent what's called a finding of no significant impact, which is our report to finalize the environmental documents. We've sent drafts of that to the Federal Transit Administration. They're our federal partner on the project. We've got a request for qualifications out for the final design consultant on the street, and so those proposals are due this week. And so those are the, once we get through the final design process, then we'll be seeking funding from the Federal Transit Administration for the last piece of money for the project.
There's a box that says UTA Board approval. that take place already?
Yeah, the previous board adopted we did a memorandum of understanding with all the project partners, and that was identified all the funding we've accumulated for the project so far. So we have a formal MOU with all the project partners that went through the previous board process.
So you're basically in that box on the second column of the development section then?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we're moving towards the implementation end of the spectrum, so getting into the final design and construction right-of-way acquisition. Once we get the finding of no significant impact completed, we have pre-award authority to do some early right-of-way acquisition and that kind of work to kind of move forward with the project. We have funding through Weber County for right-of-way acquisition as well.
How much do you think you'll need to spend on right-of-way?
We've budgeted about $5 million for right-of-way, and so we're probably close to that. And there's also, we've been assuming, like Weber State, donating the right-of-way through their campus, and we'll credit that as local match on the project. So right-of-way with the Weber State portion is another about $3.5 million worth of right-of-way.
So even though it says structurally implementation is right-of-way acquisition is under implementation, it's really going to be simultaneous to some of these other components, including the funding. Is that because of our market, or is that just because that's just how that typically works? Yeah, typically, I think the flow chart kind of shows it more linearly, but it's really more of you're doing multiple things at the same time. So we try not to just wait for one thing to do the next thing to do the next thing. So we're usually trying to do 3 or 4 things at the same time to kind of compact down that
I think when I
process.
presented this process last week, I said it's really not linear. We are doing a lot of things at the same time, and it's kind of hard to fit in a flow chart like that. But yeah, we are doing the right-of-way. As soon as we get the environmental completed, we can start doing the right-of-way. We can start procuring our contractors.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I just was kind of highlighting that part of it, but thanks.
So this is just a quick summary of what the project is. So it's we're projecting about 6,100 riders a day on the project. Total project cost is $79 million, including all the right-of-way costs. We have about 1.7 million projected for the O&M costs, with 700,000 of that is coming from Proposition 1 funding, and then there's about the balance of that comes from recapturing the existing local service in place. We've got, sorry, my phone's beeping. We've got most of what we think or hope will be the local match in place on the project. So we've got about $23 million in place. We think we might need a couple more million, but we're trying to work with the feds to see if we've got enough with what we've accumulated so far in the process. And then the current efforts, as I mentioned, the environmental process is, we're finishing that up, and then the request for proposals are due this week. And then we've got, we submitted our small starts grant, or submitted our small starts information to FTA, and I was just going through their website. So we made their website, so we're actually listed as a future project on the FTA's website, so we're excited about that. So we'll be working, continuing to work with FTA staff to advance the project through that process.
So does that mean that they've awarded us that, or it just means that they've acknowledged that we've applied? And
they've acknowledged, well, we're in project development with FTA, so they acknowledge we're in project development and that we're a project that's seeking federal funds. Okay. So it's we're excited to kind of clear that, another step across the stream, if you will.
Sure.
And this is just a little, this is the budget from the memorandum of understanding of kind of the funds we've put together on the project. So you can see there's contributions from all of the project partners that are coming in. And so we're, as well as, I didn't mention the Wasatch Front Regional Council. They've been a great partner to the project and helped with some of the locally programmed CMAQ and STP dollars for the project as well.
Our 7 million, what those coming from just our normal capital funds, or is that a special?
It's part of the when Proposition 1 passed in Weaver County.
So the portion that comes to transit.
Yeah, and there's a detailed budget on Proposition 1 and where those funds will get spent. And so some of the UTA funds are going for like the maintenance facility expansion and that we needed to do anyway. And so there's some elements of the project that are being funded or recapturing things, including them in the project, things we needed to do.
Okay.
And sorry, the schedule's a little small, but so this is our simplified schedule of the project, but we're targeting a 2022 completion for the project. We just had a nice meeting with our stakeholders yesterday, and Weber State said, yeah, could you guys open and make sure you open in August of 2022 so we can time it for school. I think that's it on the project. I was just going to mention Ogden on Board has been our TOD study that's been paralleling the capital process, so that process is also wrapping up as well.
This Friday, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's exciting news. And do we have any sense of timing on the FTA on their process of when they might make a decision?
The FTA under their rules is they said they can award grants at any time now. Be more tied with their annual cycle, but they have more latitude now, and so I think usually the way that we can most get towards those federal funds is working on our project readiness. So completing the design so we can get a contractor on board, get a cost estimate from the contractor.
Yeah.
And then we also have been talking with the project partners about doing the MOU that the previous board did kind of as an overall higher level document, identifies the funding commitments. We need to do operating and a final agreement with all the project partners, so it would identify the right of way that we need, and if UDOT's going to plow the snow for us, or all of those kind of those elements as well. And so getting those final operating agreements with the project partners is our next step. So that's typically what FTA looks at, is they want to give money to projects that are ready to move forward. So if we're have those two pieces as well as the right-of-way put together, we've got a really solid project to get federal funds.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that update. Any other questions from the board?
Sorry about the phone noise.
No, that's all right. Well, we'll just make you come back and do another presentation. So, that concludes our discussion items, and we would make note of our next meeting, which is a week from today on February the 20th. Well, next to entertain a motion to go into closed session in regards to strategy session to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation, and that closed session will be held over in the Spring Canyon Conference Room. Have a motion and a second to go into closed session. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. We'll be back. We won't have any other agenda items after this, but we'll be back to finish out our meeting.
off the record, see. But seriously, you are doing a good job. I'm really impressed. And I appreciate your efforts and stuff that you're doing and the questions you're asking. Anyway, thank you.
We've returned from our closed session, and I believe that with that we've concluded all our stuff, unless I'm missing something. So I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We stand adjourned. Thank you.